That was terrific. I want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank our organizers in the church for their persistence in bringing us all together today after some serious setbacks, and what a beautiful space, and how lucky we are to all be here together today. I love that Rami kind of started and continued with a theme of kind of bringing it back home a little bit, because that's what I'm going to talk about too. And so I want to take you back to the fall of last year for a minute, when we had the longest government shutdown ever, and we're in the middle of another partial government shutdown now today. But the fall shutdown, if you remember, if any of us can remember back that far, it feels like 100 years ago, that shutdown was partly about Democrats in Congress insisting on extending these health insurance subsidies that were part of the Affordable Care Act. And the point of that was to prevent millions of people from having their health insurance premiums double this year. And Democrats lost that shutdown. They gave it up. And so now we are facing that reality where millions of people will see health insurance, or are already seeing health insurance premiums double. And one of the significant things about that, and I have a few slides because I say a lot of numbers. I talk about the budget, I say a lot of numbers. So I have a few slides just to kind of help the numbers stick a little bit. But so if the next slide, over the 2 years after October 23, the U.S. spent at least $31 billion in military aid to Israel and in related military actions in the region. And for just a little bit more than that, for $35 billion, we could have saved all of those millions of people from having their health insurance premiums double this year. And the slide says next year. That's because we did it in the fall, but it's this year now. We're in it. So people are living this reality, the reality that is in part shaped by the money that the U.S. has sent to Israel for its genocide in Gaza. So we're living this reality in this country, many people now. So, you know, the reality that everyone's in, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It is connected. And so how are we doing as human beings in this country? We know on the next slide, this shows income changes over time. And so what you see is for the bottom rung on the economic ladder, the blue line at the bottom, you can see that income has stayed fairly stagnant. But then if you go up to the top 1% or even the top 0.01%, income is skyrocketing. So we have a really bad economic situation for a lot of people in this country, and getting worse all the time. Nearly half of people in this country now are struggling to afford basic necessities: food, shelter, transportation. We have reached $1 trillion military budget for the first time since World War II. And what I want you to see about this slide is that military spending surges sometimes. You can see the wars, you know, from Korea to Vietnam, the Cold War, the 9/11 wars. It surges sometimes, and then it sometimes comes back down, but in the long run, it always goes up. In the long run, it always goes back to higher than where it was before, since World War II. And, you know, coincidentally, that is the same time frame that we're looking at for the history, most of the history of Israel and Palestine. So probably not an accident. This $1 trillion budget means that we are spending $116 million every hour on our military. Every hour. An average worker in the United States would have to work for more than 1,700 years just to earn what we're spending in an hour. That's how much money we're throwing at this. And that's what's making everything possible that is happening in Palestine and elsewhere. So where does that money go? Half of the military budget goes to contractors. When we heard Francesca Albanese speak earlier, she spoke about Palantir, and they're one of the most egregious examples, but they're not the biggest and they're not the only. There are many, many, and half of that money is going to enrich those corporations and those people at the head of those corporations. On the next slide, another place where that's going, 750 US military installations around the world. And so this shows the bigger circles are the bigger ones. Essentially everywhere the US military has ever been, we never leave. Think about that. This shows all of those places. And some of them are very small, and some of them have tens of thousands of troops and have for decades. And we keep this going year after year after year after year. And we keep expanding, and we keep going new places. Only about, the other thing we hear about is the troops, right? We have to support our troops and all of that. Only about 20% of this budget goes to the troops. So that's what the support looks like as part of the budget. And from, the budget being, we say whatever, people say what they want, right? We hear a lot of good talk about support the troops, but the reality is that a lot of troops are on food stamps while we're paying these contractors and paying for all of these military bases all over the world. Of course, many of these are also bases that make the US action in the Middle East possible, including what's happening today in Iran and including what's been happening in Palestine. So this budget makes it easy for a president to kind of implement whatever military policy they want, because they have so much at their disposal. There is so much infrastructure, there is all of these bases, all of the military equipment, everything. So this is where we can see that a president can invade a country and kidnap their president for a price tag of about $3 billion and barely even bat an eye, because there's so much money and there's so much capacity that anything is possible, and they don't even have to ask permission. This is where we see the bombing last year of Iran that cost millions of dollars. And again, they didn't have to come to Congress and ask for more money to do that. It was just there. The money was just there lying around. This is where we see the National Guard deployments that we've seen over the past year or so, and that are still continuing in a lot of cities, where that has cost about $500 million so far and is probably going to cost another $1 billion this year. And again, they didn't have to go to Congress to ask for that money. It's just there. It's just in that $1 trillion. There is so much room that they can expand in so many ways without having to ask anyone, without having to ask any of us for permission to do it. And certainly this includes sending weapons to Israel. And it includes what we're seeing them do today in Iran, where they didn't ask for anyone for permission. They're supposed to, legally. It's, the Congress has war powers and the president doesn't, but because of Congress has handed that power over for so long, we don't see, hopefully we will see some pushback. There is some pushback in Congress to this, and I think there's likely to be a vote next week on it. But not enough pushback, and not enough to prevent this from happening, right? So, this is continuing to happen, and I know it really takes us back to the early days, or right before the Iraq war and invasion. And I just want to remind people, if you don't remember, that when that invasion started, people in the White House said it was going to cost in the range of $50 billion to $60 billion. It ended up costing close to $3 trillion, and it's not completely over yet. So that's the kind of reality check that we need to think about what we might be embarking on right now today, as we speak. Also, we have, of course, this other militarism, domestic militarism, that now is also increasingly unaccountable, where I mentioned that ICE now has $95 billion at its disposal to spend as the president instructs. That is a huge increase for them. Their normal budget last year, before this big bad bill passed, would have been about $11 billion a year. So they're now at 8 or 9 times the budget that they had. And that is why we can see them going to Minnesota. And that is why we will see wherever we see next. And I know here in Portland, you've dealt with a lot of their presence and big threats. So that's why they can do that, because they have the money. This is what makes all of this possible, is having the money available and having the resources available. That budget bill that passed last year, the big bad bill that gave money to the Pentagon and it gave money to ICE and the mass deportation agenda, and it did the tax cuts for the wealthy and it cut all these programs for the poor. The money passed in that bill for ICE and for mass deportations created a mass deportation force that in budget terms is the equivalent to the 13th largest military in the world. That's how much money they're pouring into these things. And it's all connected, right? All of these things we're concerned, they're grabbing power, they're grabbing power, they're doing what they want, they're targeting people based on their race and based on where they're from, and it's all connected. The ICE deportations here and detentions and what we're seeing in Palestine, it's all part of the same agenda. And it's not just ICE, but it's also the Border Patrol, and they're also pulling in other federal agencies that they're co-opting, like the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Agency, even U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services that are supposed to be the good ones, right? They give you your green card, they help naturalize you. No, now if you go to an appointment with them, you're just as likely to end up detained by ICE. So it's a power grab, and it's a power grab that's happening here and it's happening around the world, and it's been happening, like Phyllis talked about, for many, many, many years, decades and longer, but we're really seeing it ramp up right now. I'll also just say a word about what this is doing to the rest of the world, right? Military spending is going up astronomically here in the US, but it's also going up around the world. In 2024, we hit a new record for world military spending of $2.7 trillion. And I'll just note that if you think about us being $1 trillion, we're driving that here in the US. That was a 9% increase from the year before for world spending. And now we're seeing lots of countries pledge higher spending, right? Canada is talking about they're going to spend more and they're going to make their own weapons. Germany is spending more than ever before. Japan is planning big military spending increases. We're seeing it all over the world. And a lot of it is in response to US policy, right? It's what's happening, the US continues to fuel the war in Ukraine without any end in sight. The US has threatened Greenland. All of these things that this administration and the US have been doing for years are fueling not just our own military spending, but also the world's. So if we can go, and this is about to potentially get worse, but this is where actually also some hope comes in, because there's likely to be a backlash, and Rami talked some about sort of opposition and overreach, and we're definitely tipping into military overreach here, where I think people in this country are not going to be as willing to put up with it as they have been. So if we can go to the next. Or here we're here on the next slide. The administration has asked. We now have $1 trillion military budget, and that's the highest it's ever been since World War II. Now they want to go to the highest it's ever been, to 1.5 trillion, and they want that leap in a single year from 1 trillion to 1.5. So they're trying to spend half again as much in just a single year. There's a couple things about this. One is that it would be the highest military budget ever. The other is that they don't even know how to spend this money. Secretary Hegseth and Trump don't even know what they would do with another $500 billion for the Pentagon. They have some things on their wish list. They'd like to buy more ships. They'd like to buy more planes. They'd probably like to put more money into AI and some other new and scary systems. But it's so much money that they don't even know what to do with it. And frankly, it's not even clear why they picked that number. There's just almost no logic to it. It's like they just picked a big number and took it out of the air and said, that sounds good, let's go with that. And that's how we want them deciding our military spending, right? That's how we want them deciding what to do with $500 billion of taxpayer money. So the other thing about this is that they will almost certainly say that they need to cut other programs in order to be able to afford that. So we can say, as much as Trump has asked for cuts in the past and has gotten a lot of what he's asked for, the cuts to USAID and other programs. He wants to get rid of the Department of Education still, all of these other things. That will only accelerate because they'll say, well, we need it because we have to spend this on our security, right? So that will only get more extreme. So what happens next is all of this happens in Congress, right? That's what matters. This isn't just happening. There are people doing this, and the people doing this are the people in Congress who are making this possible, who are putting all this money in the pockets of this administration. And so that's where we need to go to stop it. So there's a few ways we can do that. One is Trump will be putting out his next budget request that will probably include this $1.5 trillion for the Pentagon, and may or may not include explicit aid to Israel. But once you add to the bucket, you add to the sense of possibilities across the board for whatever they want to do, whether they want to bomb Iran or whether they want to kidnap a president of Venezuela or whether they want to bomb Iran and give more aid to Israel. Any of those things become more possible the more money they have. And that sense of possibility can only grow and become almost limitless if the budget goes up this high. So we need to reach Congress. We need to prevent that $1.5 trillion from happening, but we need to push harder than that. We need to push for actual cuts to military spending. And we have had in the past years and will have again a bill called the People Over Pentagon bill that would cut the Pentagon and shift spending to human needs here at home. The details of that are still being worked out, but that is something we need to push for because Congress, they are the only ones who have the power to change this money, and we are the only ones who have the power to push them to do it. So that's one priority. Another is the memorandum of understanding for aid to Israel is due for a renegotiation. It will be scheduled to end in 2028. This is an agreement that the U.S. has with Israel that the last couple have provided 10 years of agreement of here's the level of aid that military aid the U.S. will give to Israel over 10 years. Israel's now asking for a 20-year agreement, which would take us to 2048, which is 100 years anniversary for Israel. And they're seeking more collaboration with the United States military on things like tech in militarism, artificial intelligence in militarism, Trump's Golden Dome project. And they're doing that partly just to curry favor, just to get this administration to agree to a longer term deal by saying, well, we want the same things you want. And so let's do this together. So one thing we need to do is resist that, but no matter what memorandum of understanding they sign, this is important, Congress still has to allow that money and agree to spend that money every single year. And if Congress doesn't do that, the country doesn't spend the money. So whatever that understanding is, whatever that MOU is signed as, we still have the opportunity every single year to push Congress not to send that money and not to spend that money that way. And I'm just going to finish by kind of bringing it back home again. And so I have a final slide. One of the things that we do at my project is we have this website calculator where you can go and you can see what it is costing your community for any of these things. And so what we have here, this is from our website, this is our calculator, and it shows that in Portland, Maine, for the $1 trillion military, taxpayers paid $175 million this year. And just as a point of comparison, the Portland, Maine school budget is less than that. It's $162 million. And so if you imagine, if you took just a fraction of that spending from the military budget and brought it back home, what it could do for people in the city of Portland or what it could do for people in the state of Maine, that is enormous. And that's something that we need to let people know, that while people are struggling to afford food and basic necessities and shelter and transportation, there is this money of ours, that is out there that can be brought back home to help make things better for us and for the people in Palestine and people around the world who are suffering the consequences of our militarism.
Thank you so much, Rami and Lindsay. I think a lot to think about there, a lot to digest, a lot that I think we're all really excited to talk about together. Some of it very dark, but very, very important to know about. A couple of questions. Oh.
Switch mics.
Oh, gosh. Sorry. I apologize. Thank you. How is that? Better? Okay. Thank you. A couple of questions that hearing your incredible work together raises for me is... Oh my... Okay, third time a charm? Okay. So how do we further clarify and make visible, right, these connections that are so important for all our survival, for all our flourishing, and for all our liberation, right? And we have some answers here, but I think it'd be really interesting to hear other answers from all of you. And then thinking about some of the inequities that particularly, Lindsay, you talked about, but others, how do we surmount these, really significant inequities in resources, in power? And I think our speakers offered us some avenues to start to do that work, but really curious to hear what this raises for others. So we'll do what we did last time. If people want to come to the mics with questions, comments, thoughts, reflections, come on up. And maybe we'll do, just before you start, maybe we'll do what we did last time, and is it okay if we take a couple of, maybe we'll do 3 questions, and then we'll see how many we can get to before a break. Thanks.
Not working? Okay. Hi, my name is Michael. I'm from Portland. I work at Maine Medical, where, as a result of ICE's invasion and occupation of Portland and other parts of Maine, we lost, for at least 1 week, I'm not speaking for Maine Medical, I'm speaking on behalf of my colleagues from Angola, from Congo, from Afghanistan, many of whom were afraid to come to work, and therefore you could see the quality of the services offered in the hospital decline in terms of the cleanliness, availability of staff to clean rooms, hallways, and so forth. So that's one. And then I want to also mention that Rami comes from a long history of work representing, if you like, the best of America. He edited Jordan Times way back when, and he ran the first Little League program in the Middle East, in Amman. So he has some credibility. Also, I want to commend him for his Substack, which I've been following since all this started up, and I recommend everybody look into that. As long as Substack agrees to have him be on the site. In terms of Lindsay's, I really appreciated Lindsay's exposition. I think that map of the lily pads of American bases is going to have to be updated very soon with a little dot on Somaliland, which is coming after Israel has recognized Somaliland, which of course has created waves throughout the whole region of the Horn of Africa, where we receive many people who have had to flee because of U.S. bases in the region and the conflicts that have ensued. So that's my wanting to say that.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. I think we'll go Ray and then Robert, and we'll let the speakers respond.
Yeah, my name is Ray. I'm from Lewiston, and I'm very grateful to everybody in this room for what's happened today. While I was attending the conference and listening to the speakers, across my news feed came a bombing of a girls' school in Iran in which over 40, maybe children, were killed. And my mind went immediately to Jeffrey Epstein, because it seems to me that we have no regard for human life, especially female human life. And that brought me to the whole idea of the Epstein class. And I think people are beginning to realize that these tech bros and these politicians and these artists and all of them are exchanging power on a level we're not even aware of. And I know this includes Israel and Mossad. So I would like some comment on that. I think we're in an age of mountainish inhumanity.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm grateful to have the chance to be here today. I do agree that Rami has a really historic and gratifying record, but I want to thank him today for his courage as a lifelong Yankee fan to come to Maine. So I hope you get out okay. As I've been listening to the speakers, not just this panel, but earlier today, I'm taken by the fact that no one's talking about color. No one's talking about race. I look around this room and I see mostly white people and a few people like me, and we pass for olive skin sometime. And we don't want to or can't, or there's something in us where we don't recognize. I have a minor Substack compared to Rami's, but I've had to write 3 of them that are all have the same title. It's about race. It's always about race. The people being deported, the people being bombed, the people being displaced, the Palestinian people who are dying in their tents, the people in the diaspora, they're all people of color. And it's more comfortable sometimes for us to think of them as the global South, or people who are outside the Judeo-Christian experience. No, it's because they're brown and they're black and they've been suffering. Mostly, I would say there was only 1 or 2 countries in the list of those that we've been discussing that wasn't occupied by the end of World War II. I mean, Israel's the only new colony, and we've let it persist in part because of color. My last comment, and thank you for this, but I just think it's important that we take this with us. Many people who support the establishment of the State of Israel fall back on a statement by Lord Balfour, offering a homeland for the Jews. Lord Balfour was a notorious anti-Semite. He wanted to support a homeland for the Jews because he wanted all the Jews in Europe to leave. It started on a false premise, and we continue to support it to this very day. And if there's a shred of decency in the Judeo-Christian consciousness about what they've done to their brothers outside of that tradition, it's time to hear that. And thank you very much.
Would you like to respond, or?
I don't think we need to say anything.
It's up to you. You can, or we can.
Yeah, I'll say thank you for all of those comments. Absolutely true about ICE affecting everything. It's been, it's medical services, it's childcare, it's food services, every part of our local communities is affected when ICE comes in. So thank you for the first comment. And yes, the map is always changing, and unfortunately more spots are popping up and spots are not disappearing from that map of US military presence. So yes, there are definitely new spots on the map. About race, I want to thank you for the last comment. Maybe it was too subtle, but yes, it is all about race. The ICE targeting, when they've been explicitly allowed to use race to target people. I mentioned the targeting of diversity, equity, inclusion programs. That is about race. Those programs are being targeted because of who they are helping, because they are helping people who are not white. The targeting of, what's being allowed to happen in Palestine or what's being allowed to happen in so many other places is so much more invisible or so much more sort of accepted because of who's being affected. So absolutely, it's in the middle of everything. And right now it's always there. That current is always there in the United States. And right now we have an administration where it's explicit, where, it's not under the surface anymore, it's above the surface. And so that's, I totally appreciate that. And on the sort of the secret power, I do actually think part of that, when we talked, or when Phyllis talked earlier and someone asked about the disconnect between the Democratic sort of power holders and elite versus Democratic rank and file on this, I think there are multiple parts to that explanation, but one of the parts is simply the circles that those people travel in. It's not just the money. It's not as simple as just the money. It's the social circles that the Democratic elite are in, are social circles where you align with Israel and not social circles where you align with Palestine. So we have to, I think appreciating that will help us, especially if we think it's all about the money, to appreciate that it's not, that yes, it's the money, but it's not just the money. I think that is something that would help us to understand.
Can we take a couple more? I know we're starting to move into, or should we take the break and then take a couple more? Okay. All right, let's maybe do...
I think it's the turn of the gospel side.
Start with you, and then I think the two of you on this side were here first, so maybe we'll do 1, 2, 3, and then would you two write down your questions and save it for our next conversation, because we definitely want to hear from everyone.
Hi, I'm Betsy. I'm from Unity in Rockland. For Lindsay, do I remember that the way Biden and Blinken got around going to Congress was by putting every installment just a little bit lower, so they ended up sneaking things through without anybody being aware?
Yes, you're remembering correctly. That happened multiple times. This administration is doing it too. That is for weapons sales. So Israel is paying for those weapons, although often they are paying for those weapons
with our money.
With our money, and we don't. And there's not a perfect transparency about when are they using our money or when maybe they're using some of their own money. But yes, you are not incorrect. There is a threshold for when Congress needs to approve military sales, and they will do repeated amounts right below that threshold in order to avoid having to have Congress weigh in.
Okay, yes, and to his point, yes, it's color and it's oil. Oil is the other driver for the Middle East and Venezuela. Anyway, and for Rami, for your comment about the Christians of Palestine. In December, I happened to be in Bethlehem, staying at the Bethlehem Bible College, when they said, "Oh my, 1,000 Christian ministers are visiting Jerusalem. Oh, it's as though the Jews finally discovered that, hey, there are Christians." And and everybody in Bethlehem and Beit Shahor, which is the biggest Christian population in the country, said, "Gee, nobody called us. Nobody came to visit." The director of the school wrote a post, and two ministers said, oh, we didn't realize that there were Christians in the Holy Land, and now there's a big push. I was reading something from Sabeel that said, now they're trying to say, oh, Jesus was not a Palestinian, even though he was Aramaic. Yeah, he spoke Aramaic. It was, yes. So how do we reconcile the hijacking of Christianity into something that is supported by the Israelis and not by the rest of the world?
I would say it's probably, I'm not an expert on this, but being a journalist, I don't have to be an expert. I can say anything I want as long as it sounds good. I think it's due to the realization that the Christian Zionist group, I mean, there's a lot of variations within it, but Christian Zionists as a whole are a huge ally of Israel. They know that, and they realize that they are their strongest ally possibly now in the United States, that the Christian Zionists have to be cultivated much more vigorously than before. And that's what they're doing now, because they're losing support among many other groups, including young Jews. I read 2 reports in the last few days, but very briefly, I didn't have time to go through them. I saw a credible report saying that even among the Christian Zionists, there's starting to be now some deterioration, some attrition. Some of them are realizing they're being used, and they don't want to be genocidal. So that, I think, is what explains it. The Israelis will make deals with, or the Israeli government, because not all Israelis are bad people, but the Israeli government will make deals with anybody that will allow it to continue its policies. And they don't, and they make agreements with gangs in Palestine. They made agreements with gangs in Lebanon. So it doesn't matter who they are, but if they can help the ideology and policy goals of the Israeli state, then Israel will cultivate them, and that's how I would explain it.
All right, maybe we'll take the last 2 comments on this side, and then we'll take a brief break.
Thank you. I have the forgettable name of Michael Smith, and I'm from Portland. I'd like to start by thanking First Parish for stepping up. After what I can only call the abject, craven servility and poltroonery of the USM management. And that's a final word, poltroonery. Let's hold on to that one. That's a nice hook for the comment that I'd like to make, and it's also implicit in some of Mr. Khoury's comments, I think. I've been taking an interest in this topic for 50 years now, and I've seen, just in recent years, a tremendous shift in public opinion in this country on this topic. You wouldn't have seen a gathering like this even 5 or 6 years ago. So the public has moved in a very big way. The institutions have not. All the institutions remain absolutely in the death grip of, I don't know what to call it, the Israel lobby, the Israel mafia, the Epstein class, they're pretty much coextensive. And so we have a very interesting situation, unprecedented in my rather long life, where the public is very decidedly in one place and all the institutions are dead set against it. And it reminds me of a wonderful poem by Bertolt Brecht. I won't bore you with the German, but he says that the people have lost the confidence of the government. So clearly the government will have to dissolve the people and elect another one. And the government and all the other institutions, media, education, politics, are clearly trying to dissolve the people here. And as I say, an unprecedented state of affairs in my life. So it kind of raises an interesting question. Who's going to dissolve whom? Now, my crystal balls have all gone rather dark on this topic, so I have no insight to offer. But I know I don't want to be dissolved. And if one party's got to dissolve the other, I want it to be us undissolved. Thank you very much.
While we are here discussing, this is more of a comment and less of a question, but while we're here discussing the companies that directly benefit from this genocide and discussing heightening the contrasts for people so they can see the truth of the societies that they live in, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all the prisoners currently being held for standing up to the war machine, and more simply, for standing up for humanity, human dignity, and the sanctity of life. The Palestinian prisoners, men, women, children, journalists, and doctors abducted from Gaza and the rest of occupied Palestine being held in the Israeli occupation's concentration camps. I want to thank the Palestine Action hunger strikers, many of whom have been recently released after 15 or more months in prison, who risked their lives while striking in UK prisons. I want to sincerely acknowledge the ongoing actions of Palestine Action UK and its co-founder Huda Amori, who are daily blocking UK factories that manufacture the weapons components killing families in Palestine. They are laying out a clear blueprint for how to materially grind this genocide to a halt and striking significant blows at the heart of the machine. Shout out also to the dock workers' unions across Mediterranean ports who are organizing to shut down the war economy in its entirety. And also a shout out to activists across Canada whose sustained direct actions recently forced Scotiabank to divest from Elbit weapons systems.
Absolutely. Is that, yeah. Yes, please.
That last speaker comes from Lubeck, Maine.
Thank you for everything. Sorry, not used to microphones. So I am a Palestinian. On my mother's side, father's side, I did the ancestral thing, and we go back. So I'm an indigenous Palestinian. We go back thousands of years. My question is, what would it take for us, and the question is for the two of you, I didn't know who to ask. What would it take for us to revoke the legality of something called the State of Israel, going back to the day it was recognized at the UN? In my opinion, and in the opinion of all indigenous Palestinians, Palestine is from the river to the sea, from the Mediterranean River, from the Mediterranean Sea to the River of Jordan. That's Palestine. Israel, I do not recognize Israel as a state. I do not recognize Israel's right to exist. It has no right to exist in Palestine. And what my question is, what would it take for us to say this whole recognition of a bunch of thugs, a bunch of Zionist thugs, attacking, killing, maiming, stealing, doing all sorts of atrocities in Palestine? How did the UN recognize that as a state in 1949, was it? How can that be revoked? And we can't say, oh, this was whatever, 80 years ago. I don't care if it was 300 years ago. It needs to end. The existence of Israel needs to end. Any thoughts? I don't know if this is rooted in international law. I don't know where the answers for this question would be. But I'm willing to put my life on the line to see the day that Israel ends its existence as a state. And please, I don't want anybody to attack me and say I'm an anti-Semite. I am not anti-Semitic, I am a Semite. I can't be anti myself. That's number one. And I'm not saying let's kill all the Israelis. I'm not saying that. I'm saying Israel as a state has no right to exist. It was always Palestine, and it will always be Palestine.
Thank you very much for those comments. I think your basic point is correct. I think the challenge is how do we reconcile the views you express, which most of us, I think, in the region share, but how do you reconcile that with the existing realities of the world, both in terms of law and power? Now, we had an example after the fall of the Soviet Union of all kinds of states reconfiguring and changing their names and splitting up and joining up, and it's happened many times in many places around the world. So there's nothing sacred about any country, in theory. It could, Israel could disappear. I think that the Arab governments, who should play a big role, have not played a major role in this because they're not strong enough to assert their views in the face of the kind of threats and pushback and destruction they would get from Western powers if they were to say something like Israel shouldn't exist. So all the Arab governments, including the Palestinian government, accepted the right of Israel as a state, but conditioned those rights on Israel accepting UN resolutions and requirements, which means ending the occupation, allowing Palestinian self-determination, allowing Palestinian statehood, and recognizing the right of return. Now, those are all words. If they were to be applied, then Israel would no longer exist in its current form. So the question is, how do we find the middle ground that is fair and reasonable to everybody? And people are working overtime. There's about 10 different projects around the Middle East and the world to try to find a formula of recognizing the rights of the Israeli people and state and the rights of the Palestinian people and their state to be. And none of these have reached anywhere because the Israelis simply won't talk about this, and the Americans essentially follow Israel's lead in the Middle East. My personal guess is that Israel as a state will probably continue to exist, but it has to be redefined and reconfigured. And Zionism has to be neutered. It has to be taken away from its military colonial past and revert to what it was when some people in southern Russia in 1860 said that, you know, we need to get out of here because we're being treated like animals by the Christian white European Russians. And the Zionist movement was essentially a response to Christian white European racism and apartheid. And so the concept of a Jewish state is, in theory, it can exist, but it can't exist when it takes over the land of the Palestinians. It's not acceptable in its current form. It's totally unacceptable. And the Arab countries have struggled to find the middle ground, which they've expressed, which nobody pays attention to, because the Arab states don't use their power to implement any of these ideas. So it's a topic that needs to be really worked on seriously.
And if I may suggest, Summer, excuse me a second, this could be already starting our last session discussions. So I suggest that we push that forward to our last session's discussion. We're getting caught up on time. Let's have a little break, and then we'll go into the international law session. Thanks.